Crimson Desert's tech almost seems too good to be true. They claim that the game can run at 4K 60 with ray tracing and no DLSS, and when you look at the gameplay footage, there's insane player counts, there's real-time lighting, there's very obviously physics happening as well as big effects, cloth simulation, water simulation. This seems too good to be true. I mean, again, they've demonstrated the water simulation on and off, where you can see here on the right that there's some details there. There's fluid simulation of fog and physics. You can see that there's a full real-time day-night cycle with lighting and weather changes, so this can't all be baked for performance reasons. It has to be done in real time. They are showing cloth and hair simulations that look extremely realistic, including with horseback riding and the horse's mane and tail reacting, brush and bushes reacting in the background. And they even are showing, again, ray tracing off versus ray tracing on, where you get more realistic shadows and things like this. And again, the developers have claimed that 4K 60 with ray tracing on, with no DLSS, FSR, or other AI assistance, is possible. Now, I will say that the ray traced shadows here are maybe not the highest resolution I've ever seen. So, in other words, I wonder if they're not pushing ray tracing as far as you see in a path traced game, but all of this tech in a game that shows this big of draw distances and world. Again, if we go back to this kind of time lapse here, look how many trees and everything is on screen, the draw distance there. That's pretty crazy. Now, I think it would be impossible to get good performance out of something like this if it was built on Unreal Engine 5, for example. But this is coming from their own engine technology that they've built for this game. IGN, having their own look at it, is calling it insanely good engine tech. And the game developers already said that the game went gold a while back, that currently they're just focused on optimization to make the game run as good as it possibly can before launch. Now, you would hope that's what every game is trying to do, but given the launch state of a lot of games, that's not always the case. They're saying we have gone gold. Now comes further optimization to make the game run as good as it possibly can, and that's as important of a part. So that's the phase we're currently in between now and launch, to make sure that the experience when players eventually get their hands on the game is as smooth as possible. They're not going into specifics on graphic settings on consoles. They do say there's PS5 Pro enhancements available, and again, they're saying that they can do 4K 60 native, complete with ray tracing without the aid of graphics technology such as DLSS or FSR, but of course you'll need powerful hardware to do that. In other words, I'm guessing that's probably running on a 5090. But I want to be clear right now, there's a lot of games where maxed out with ray tracing at 4K native resolution and no DLSS or frame generation, where even a 5090 can be below 30 FPS. So that is nothing to sneeze at, even if they're saying that is on something like a 5090. They're not saying that, but they're also not saying it isn't. Anyway. But then if you can then kick on DLSS and FSR to get performance above and beyond that, that does sound pretty great. He's saying it's not perfectly optimized necessarily, but within the engine, it's using every single thing, so it's as optimized as it can be within that space. That's not possible otherwise, and so rendering thousands of trees within draw distance, it does those things better than an off-the-shelf engine, cough cough Unreal Engine, could because of that. Off-the-shelf engines, Unreal Engine 5, weren't able to deliver the uncompromised vision that the developers set forth to create with this game, so they needed to create their own engine in order to deliver on that vision. Now, here's the thing. All of this sounds amazing, and the PC system requirements don't look that crazy demanding, but none of that means it's actually going to perform well when we get our hands on it. So this is a game I definitely want to test when it launches. But for now, we do just have that kind of information and the PC system requirements to go off of. Speaking of which, the minimum requirements for this game are a GTX 1060 or an RX 6500 XT, which is practically nothing by today's standards. The GTX 1060 released in 2016. I'm going to assume they mean the 6GB version, not the 3GB version. It would be insane if they could fit this game into 3GB of VRAM. I don't know. But anyway, the 6GB version came out July 19th, 2016. So going on about 10 years ago. It was $299 at the time, but 10 years ago. And they're again listing the AMD RX 6500 XT, which according to Tech PowerUp's relative performance chart is very similar performance to the GTX 1060. Within 4%. Now, if you don't have one of these particular GPUs, all my sources will be linked in the video description, including this, the Tech PowerUp GPU relative performance chart. Now, this is not perfect on a game-by-game basis or anything like that, but it's a good way to interpret something like this, where you might not have any of the specific hardware listed, and take a look at how your specs line up relative to that. So you set the GTX 1060 as the baseline by clicking on it, and then you can scroll up or down to kind of see where you land. So if you have something like a GTX 1660 or 17% above the minimum spec, RTX 3050 8GB is 20% above the minimum spec, a GTX 1070 would be 35% above, RTX 2060 is 55% faster than the minimum spec. Also, by getting to the 20 series, you would now have access to DLSS rather than just FSR. Cards like the Arc A580 would be 67% above the minimum. Cards like a 2070 would be 81% above the minimum, so we're almost twice as fast now. And if you have an RTX 3060, 12GB, that is 95% faster. In other words, about double the performance of the minimum specs for the game's system requirements. And as we're going up from here, we're starting to get close to the game's recommended GPU, which is the RTX 2080. This is 2.2 times the performance of the min-spec GPU. So notice, though, that these kinds of system requirements charts, these have been up for a long time, although there were even older system requirements posted over a year ago that were updated to these, but that was quite a while back. The original ones were actually much higher than this, so it seems like some optimization took place or they dialed back their ambitions. I don't know, the gameplay footage still looks pretty ambitious to me. But the point is that this is all we have to go off of. Now notice they're not giving us resolution or frame rate targets or graphic settings targets, so this is not a lot to go off of. I was delaying making this video hoping they would post one of those larger system requirements charts, and maybe that'll come out in the future, and maybe I'll do an updated video or at least update something in a comment, pinned comment, something like that. But this is all we have to go off of for now. So one thing I can do is at least speculate. So I would say, given what we are seeing, but also seeing that, you know, some of these big features in their engine can be turned off, like they're showing the, the water simulation, you can turn it off. They're showing the ray tracing, but again, you can have that turned on or off, right? So given that we can turn off these features, I would imagine this game is going to be pretty scalable. That's what I'm reading here. So I would imagine cards like a GTX 1060 or 6500 XT are probably targeting a rough 30 FPS average and at a very low internal rendering resolution. So maybe 1080p monitor, but using like performance mode upscaling at the lowest possible graphics settings. Given the kind of game that we're looking at on screen, that's to me the only thing that sounds reasonable for what we're seeing on screen, and those kinds of system requirements would be turning all the big features off. And then, reading the developer interview, they were even saying like you could turn particle effects off. So if you turn everything off and expect a rough 30 FPS average, that's probably what this is giving you. Now, given the fact that an RTX 2080 is about 2.2 times that performance, now I would be expecting a 60 FPS average, probably still only at a native 1080p, if it's even native. That might still, oftentimes that's using like DLSS quality or FSR quality, so like a 720p internal rendering resolution, outputting a 1080p monitor image. So it wouldn't surprise me if this was 1080p native 60 or 1080p like DLSS quality 60, and probably more like medium graphic settings. Oftentimes, If they're just giving recommended specs, but no other like resolution, frame rate, graphic setting target, what I would read into that frequently is that this is kind of the PS5 graphic settings, maybe their performance mode. So 60 FPS at PS5-like resolution and image quality settings would be my guess. And I want to be clear, that's an educated guess. Now, another reason that's an educated guess is, again, 2080 and 6700 XT from AMD. These are a little bit more powerful than a PS5 GPU-wise, but consoles, being one specific hardware target, are often a bit more optimized for than what we get on PC. So this would be... I would reasonably expect something similar to PS5 equivalent performance here, even though these are a bit more powerful than what's actually in a PS5. Notice if I set the 2080 as the 100% baseline, then a 6700 XT is actually pretty similar performance-wise, about 13% more powerful, but the 2080 could access more modern upscaling, and if we're talking about enabling ray tracing, the 2080 is generally faster, so... Again, we don't know if these are recommended specs or targeting ray tracing or not. I would say maybe on the 2080, but not the 6700 XT, and we don't know how heavy the ray tracing is. My guess is it's fairly light as ray tracing goes. Anyway, so that's about where we're at. So I'm speculating it's PS5-ish settings at around 1080p, at least output resolution, maybe native resolution, probably 60 FPS, and I would assume that's kind of medium-ish graphics settings. But again, that's a lot of speculation. Now, going up from here, that would mean cards like the 4060 are right in line with the 2080. Cards like the 5050, right in line with the 2080. On the AMD side of things, 7600 XT is kind of in this ballpark, 3060 Ti is in this ballpark, 5060, now we're talking almost 30% more powerful, so you'd be turning up settings a little bit or just more likely getting a higher frame rate at those types of settings. 4060 Ti 8GB is right around there as well, 30% faster. 3070 is about 30% faster, we're also talking like 2080 Ti there. Now, newer gen cards, like a 9060 XT 8GB, 33% faster than that recommended spec. Cards like the RX 6800, now we're talking even more powerful, 36% faster, but older gen AMD won't have access to FSR 4. 3070 Ti here, about 40% faster. So you can kind of read into this as I sort of scroll through so you can get an idea. And again, you can find your GPU here. So if you're on something like RTX 4070, you're significantly ahead, 70% ahead of their recommended spec. So you're probably turning up more graphic settings, getting higher frame rates, maybe running at a higher monitor resolution, 1440p, that kind of thing. 3090 is almost twice as powerful as what they're asking for recommended-wise. 5070, again, almost twice as powerful. 9070, a little more than twice as powerful as what they're asking for here. So that's kind of where we're at. So I would expect cards like the 5090 to maybe run at 4K 60 maxed out settings with no upscaling, but again, that's over 4 times as powerful as their recommended spec. So anyway, that's what we've got. Other than we could talk about CPU side of things. Now, in a big open world game with this many characters on screen, because again, when they're showing scenes like this, there's a ton of characters. And when I looked at some gameplay footage and people talking about they went to conferences, got to try out the game, they described it as having tons of characters in combat. So when I see things like that combined with a big open world and class and physics simulations and ray tracing, I worry about the CPU side of things quite a bit. Now here they're saying the minimum processor is a Ryzen 5 2600X or an i5 8500. That's not asking for anything too crazy. I'd put that as less powerful than what's in like a PS5. And on the PC side of things, that's fairly old tech. 2600X was a mid-range 6-core 12-thread CPU that launched in April of 2018 at $229. So this was a mid-range chip in 2018, so we're talking just about 8 years ago. So 8 years mid-range chip, they're saying it can at least run the game, but I would not necessarily expect a smooth 60 FPS on the CPU of this class. So I would expect this to not hold 60 FPS when you get a lot of characters on screen. Core i5 8500, 6-core 6-thread, Also about an 8-year-old CPU. This one actually just right about 8 years old. February 14th of 2018. This came out a little under $200. So they're not asking a ton out of the minimum spec CPUs, but like I said, I wouldn't necessarily by the eye test expect 60 FPS off of that. For the recommended CPUs, they're talking Ryzen 5 5600 or i5 11600K. So Ryzen 5 5600, this is 6-core 12-thread again, but now a much more modern generation, and this is more powerful than the CPU in like a PlayStation 5. So this was April 20th of 2022. So we're now talking mid-range chip from about 4 years ago. Launched at $199, so nothing insane. And newer gen CPUs are a lot more powerful than this. But I would expect this to be kind of what you need for about 60 FPS most of the time. i5 11600K, also a 6-core 12-thread part, and this one from March 16th of 2021, so about 5 years old. That was a $262 chip when they launched it. So it's looking like if you have a fairly modern CPU, you should probably be fine. I would, like I said, expect these to be 60 FPS in really demanding areas and higher than that in less demanding areas by just my eye test. And I kind of just have an idea for how things run in a lot of games. But I don't know this engine. If I saw this game and heard it was Unreal Engine 5, I would be, doubting these specs would be getting you very smooth performance, especially without a ton of upscaling. But they're using their own custom engine, and by the looks of it, it sounds like it's going to be a pretty good engine. So we'll have to see how things go. That's what I've got for you guys today. And I hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting. Let me know if you're interested in me benchmarking this game when it launches. I certainly am. The launch date, by the way, is, do I have to zoom out to get this to show up? March 19th. So coming up in about 1 month, a little bit less. Hope all of you guys have an excellent day.